Ladies and gentlemen, functional friends, welcome back to the Holistic Savage Podcast. We like to talk about everything on the show related to functional medicine, functional spirituality, functional psychology, everything, all the functional things. And you can't spell functional without fun. So today I am so excited. Dr. Jill Krista, who I consider a dear friend, although we've never met in person, but we float in the same circles. We have a lot of the same friends. And we are both proud Mold Squad members. We're rocking our Mold Squad t-shirts today. Dr. Jill, this has kind of been a long time coming, and I couldn't be more excited to chat with you today.
Likewise. Super excited for this conversation.
Absolutely. And I don't even know where to begin. So we're gonna be talking a little bit about mold brain, because mold is a subject near and dear to both of our hearts. And I always like to joke that we didn't choose the mold life kind of chose us. So to kind of kickstart the convo, Jill, being a leading expert, a doctor of naturopathic medicine with an expertise in mold, which I also hear you're pretty darn sharp when it comes to pans and pandas. And of course, I know that you're brilliant with, like we pick our favorite subjects, but certainly the scope of knowledge is huge. But I'd love to kind of kickstart this convo of how you got into the mold life, and we'll see where this leads.
Yeah, I love that. Mold chose me for sure. So yeah, I was started working with Lyme patients. So I'm trained as a primary care doctor, as a naturopathic doctor, and ended up in southern Wisconsin, which after seeing a lot of patients in family practice, realizing I'm in heavy metal country, I'm in dioxin country because of all the paper processing plants upstream from me. So it's like an environmental soup. And once we got people cleaned out, there were all these people that still weren't getting better, even though we chelated and we cleaned and all that. And they had Lyme. So then I'm like, okay, I don't really know a lot about Lyme. I'm going to go be a Lyme expert. So I did the Aaaaaand training, which is much more of a functional integrative approach. And so it was very fitting. I didn't know a lot about how to do the antibiotics and that kind of thing. So it was really good for me to expand my education. And boy, when you apply these principles of find and treat the cause, once we were able to find stealth infections, so Lyme, co-infections, all that goes along with a tick bite, then you treat that, people tend to get better. But I still had this other group that still wasn't getting better. And they were the hardest working patients ever. I mean, there's people that walk out with their plan. I usually discuss the plan with people, like, what are you willing to do? Does this seem like this could work? Especially with kids, they come into my medicine area and they have to taste everything first so that we know that compliance isn't going to be as big of an issue. And the parents then have that third person say, well, you told Dr. Jill that you liked it, so and I'm going to call Santa, I'm going to call Dr. Jill and tell her that you're not taking your stuff. So yeah, we got into the Lyme world and these people weren't getting better. This little subset of people, in one of that group, they found mold in his home. It was black mold, so Stachybotrys, plus, all its friends. And he had cancer diagnosis, chronic pain, chronic anxiety, tinnitus, pelvic pain. He called himself the glass man. Every time he'd step off a curb, he could sprain his ankle. So that collagen breakdown piece, just all the wrong things happening to somebody who was doing all the right things. And that got me thinking, wow, I don't think I really understand mold. I knew it as sort of an allergy problem. And yeah, he had a little sinusitis, but like not asthma and all the things that I left medical school understanding mold to be. And I was thankfully trained in environmental medicine where they said, yeah, mold can be also sort of a MS picture. So I understood that, but he didn't fit any of those things. So as I was digging into the research, it was like, oh my goodness, I don't understand mold at all. So lots of animal research on mycotoxins, which is in my patient population, the majority of the symptoms are due to these mycotoxin exposure, certainly to spores, spore fragments, that's part of the picture, but there's all these other things that can happen from mycotoxins. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that's why that person's still sick. That's why that person's still sick. And as we investigated each of those stories, we found mold exposure in almost all of those cases. So that kicked off the whole mold journey for me. And then mold duped me. We moved into a relatively new house and it was summertime, windows were open, it was beautiful fall. As we closed up for wintertime, so I live where there's 4 seasons, my family and I, even our dogs, started getting sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. And I didn't understand it. And finally in February, the flood revealed itself. It was like enough of the material got saturated
Mm.
that we had a literal flood in my kitchen. And I was like, boom, this is mold. I know what to do. I knew who to call. I have my inspectors I work with, had worked with the past decade before this happened to us. I knew the remediators that did a good job because I would do home visits for my patients. So, I had it all the skill set, and I knew the protocol to get everybody on. And that's when I felt just really duty bound to write my book, because I thought this, everybody can do this. This
Mhm.
isn't rocket science. It doesn't require medication to get better. Some people need it, but the majority of people, this is a detox and immune modulating condition, and we have these tools at hand. So yeah, then the book was born. Long
Absolutely.
story.
No, 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 no. I love it, and it really helps set the stage. I remember I was reading your book, Break the Mold. Amazing book. I was reading it like on the plane back in, I don't know, 2019. I'm bopping all over, and I think mold is a very intimidating subject. I think it's very
Mhm.
misunderstood, and I think literally like right now, I mean, it's exploding as a topic, and certainly there's the two sides of it. We need more awareness, but of course, with heightened awareness comes heightened sensationalism and incorrect information and bandwagon kind of stuff going on. And it's hard. It's really hard. And I know you get this because you and I are, and our other mold friends, not moldy friends, but mold friends are. Sharing similar content out there. And of course, there's a lot of people that are in this very kind of hyper reactive mode and they're desperate for information. But you said something really powerful in there, which is also where I never shied away from it either, even though I'm an unlicensed functional dude. Because, yeah, the vast majority of the work and the vast majority of the healing doesn't really require pharmaceuticals. Certainly, there's a time where maybe some antifungals or a time for a prescription binder, but for the most part, it's a lot of environmental, it's a lot of lifestyle behavior modification, and there really aren't any shortcuts or whatnot. But like we agreed upon, it's like, well, the mold life chooses you because nobody cares about mold until you get sick from it. And I have my history of living in a moldy house. With there's five of us, an ex fiance and her three kids, and everybody got hit differently. And that's kind of
Yes.
where a lot of the confusion comes in. It's like, well, how could that be? One person's like, well, she was the canary. I have my susceptibilities. The
Yeah.
son has this. The other two, no problem. So I'd love to get your take on, because obviously we don't want to sensationalize mold to the point where everybody's afraid of it. We want that empowerment and awareness without the fear, because fear is not a very helpful healing emotion. So what would you say when it comes to like, all right, we've co-evolved as a species for what, bipedal hominid's been around for like 200,000 plus years, fungi's been around for like a few million years, whatever it is. So we've
Hmm.
co-evolved with mold, and even there's some, not a lot, sparse literature on the microbiome that suggests like, well, maybe even toxin producing molds are kind of a normal part of our microbiome. So how would you say, okay, like we all get exposed pretty much every day, but like, how do we know when we need to really quote unquote worry about it or start looking a little bit deeper into like, is mold affecting my health? How would you answer
That's so interesting. So I'm going to just frustrate everybody that I think we
that?
are a little bit mycotoxin obligate.
Yeah,
I really do think we are. I think I mean, we use it, statins are a mycotoxin.
yeah.
So there's something that can be very provoking and purgative about being exposed to micro amounts of toxins. And you're seeing this now with like psilocybin and those kind of things. Like that, there are certain things that when you have a little bit of it, and psilocybin's probably a wrong example, but a little bit of it, it induces the body to do a cleanse. And that's why I'm such a fan of bitters, because typically poisonous plants are going to taste a little more bitter. And so what that does is the taste of bitter encourages the body to increase secretions, to do a purgative action to try to move things. So I think a little bit of mycotoxin in food is absolutely normal. I think that there are ways that we are storing food, that we aren't getting a once in a while exposure to a mycotoxin because we're at the end of a season where we've stored food for the winter or something like that. That's when we maybe would have gotten it more. Or at the end of a fruit season, let's say there's going to be more on the raspberries just at the end of the season, that kind of thing. But now with our food source, we're being exposed to it a little bit every day. And that's a little too much when we have all the other toxins trying to, go through the liver, which is a, really tight highway these days, very crowded, lots and lots of toxins. So yeah, we absolutely evolved with it. We use molds to help us decompose previously living organic matter. And I think we've really confused the mold. And we've also come at it with a real affront. So we have antifungals, right? So we're doing monoculture. We're not respecting the plants. We overgrow grains. We overstore it. We overgrow corn. We store it. We become sort of hoarding in our way that we make our food. And I think the mold is just like, okay, I'm just doing my job now. But then we're going to spray that corn with antifungals before we harvest it and put it away. And now the fungus has to get a little more creative and a little more virulent, if we want to call it that way. And now we're also taking homes that are previously living organic material, and we're building the same kind of home no matter what terrain you live in, which is not natural. Native Americans did not do that. They changed their building based on what was going on in the world around them. So we're really inviting mold into our situation. We're growing right, I live, it's been raining, and I live in a community, there's a house going up in the middle of the rain. We have such hubris that antifungal and pressure treated wood is, nothing can grow on it. Well, it's mold safe or whatever. And then the industry's kind of picked up on that. Even there's new OSB board they're calling like mold safe, and that's the trademark name of it and that kind of thing. And so, the guys putting it up, they're like, oh, there's a little funk on it. We'll just turn that backwards so that the people don't see it because they think of mold as an aesthetic problem. So yeah, I get blamed because I take people off mushrooms and fungus in the beginning of their therapeutic period. A therapeutic diet for me, if you've been exposed to mold, is trying to take away all the things in that fungal family for a brief period of time so the body can realize it's not being attacked by food. That's something you can control, because the message in that mycotoxin, which is different than the message in an endotoxin, intention is everything. The intention in a mycotoxin is to harm and kill another living being. The intention in an endotoxin is just like a dumb bacteria that dumped its stuff, like all the stuff fell out of its purse kind of thing. Like there's not a malintent. So when I look at that, like intention is everything, that's where I give a lot of respect to mycotoxins. And when you're exposed to that in the indoor air, your own microbiome, which I can't wait for us to talk more about that, of your sinuses, your gut, it hears that intention. And so it starts to feel threatened and it starts to behave differently. So that's where you might have in the history, we would have mold that we would purposefully foster in our compost pile, in our gardens at the end of the year. You might keep the leaves on and mulch them so that it can foster some of these microbes that will then create your food the next year. But the problem is that we're basically living in compost piles. They're way too humid. We have a bunch of litter. We have clutter, people don't dust. We have huge spaces to keep up with. And it's a lot if you don't have like helpers. So you have humidity, you have clutter, you have its favorite food. It's going to perceive that's a compost pile. And then we can get into all the energetics too. If you have stuff that you need to have help processing and transforming or transmuting into different nutrients, there's an energy of mold. And I was definitely in that space. Like mold, I invited it. I was in a very fear-based place. I just had a major loss in my life. It's a very involuting thing. And fear is a very involuting thing. So I love what you said of like, how do we keep people empowered, knowledgeable, and empowered by the information to make the changes they need to make, and have mold be in their rearview mirror and not be fearing it, and also respecting it. So I think, that combination, thinking of it not as an evil thing, but, and I vilify it a lot in my book just to try to like keep it light, you know, because that was the thing I saw in the mold world as I started to get into it. You know, stepping my toes out to be in a public place was, wow, the message is it's heavy. You don't ever get better.
Yeah.
You know, it's going
Yeah.
to be a trudge. And so doctors would be like, nope, I'm not even going there. And I think that that's really something I hope that I brought to it is lightness, positivity, hope, a system. Don't be afraid of it. You are seeing mold patients. They are there. You're not recognizing them, and you could be so much more efficient with how you deal with these people.
Absolutely.
Long-winded answers to you, my friend.
Hey, I know that's what this podcast is all about. I do kind of Joe Rogan style, just like the
Love
long,
it.
because that's how you really get into it. I know everybody wants fast these days. Everybody wants instant gratification. Everybody wants easy answers, and it's like no, 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 no. Like without some context, without some holistic thinking, because a big the mold thing, it's a huge conversation, and you just put a lot of different perspectives on it of more the energetic esoteric but also systems biology, because mold and mold illness makes no sense without kind of doing a little bit of a history lesson and evolution, where we come from, systems
Hmm.
biology, how does the human species fit into a bigger ecosystem on this planet, and looking at how we are the only living species in existence as far as we know that doesn't live in symbiotic harmony with the natural world. And it's like I wonder if
We are
things
paying for
started
it.
going awry there, right? Seasonality, right? Of we live in a seasonless world, and the produce is the same all year, and our bodies are exposed to the same temperature, the same climate, so on and so forth. So a lot of it is kind of one of those, almost like a developed lack of tolerance towards whether it's mold or really any other microbe. And as you said too, with the energetic side and kind of the fear-based side, something I'm sure you've seen me posting about, and I think all of us mold squatties kind of are in agreement on that, where it's like a lot of these people that are really severely mold ill, they do have unresolved trauma, they do have a lot of kind of fear-based emotional psychology going on, and those are the hardest people, where it's like a lot of it we have to kind of get them out of that mindset. And of course then, and we'll continue on into this subject, because mold does something really weird to the human brain. I mean, of course,
Yes.
that's kind of my whole focus, as and there's a million and a half things that contribute to neuroinflammation, excitotoxicity, and microglial dysfunction, but mold especially does something really weird and nasty. So we'll kind of gateway there through the microbiome, where um, your answer was so beautiful and eloquent and well rounded. So I'd love to hear, as we continue that thread. So, like, all right, the microbiome, germ theory versus terrain theory. And it's like considering germ theory is, obviously still the leading medical paradigm. And
You think?
in case 2020
Yeah,
elucidated anything for us,
right.
no, exercise, nutrition has nothing to do with immune health. Obesity has nothing to do with it. Just, the myopia and the reductionism just is mind blowing to me. And especially with mold, trying to heal from mold doesn't make sense if you're looking at it very reductionistic. Like, how do I just scoop in and scrape the mycotoxins out? How do I just kill that mold? So tell us a little bit about, with the great decomposer of fungi in our environment, and fungi being like, growing underneath the earth, and the hyphal networks that connect all living life and all the cool stuff. So then, how does it start with? We have the microbiome, we've got the sinuses, the gut, and how that kind of affects our immune system. I'd love to hear your eloquent sort of outline of that.
Well, I mean, I think it's just a kind of a continuum, that when you are exposed to the spores, the spore fragments, that starts an inflammatory reaction. And we have lots of ways to wiggle mucus up our respiratory passages so we can either blow it out or, clear our throat and swallow it, all the goopy, gross stuff. If you get too much of that, it overwhelms the system. And if you get too much of that, it overwhelms your immune system. And then the immune system can't continue to keep that tissue regulated. And that's where you can get spore invasion. there's a broad misconception in the conventional model that only people with HIV and that are going through chemo can get an infection with Aspergillus or even Stachybotrys. We're finding Stachybotrys in lung tissue. So that's a broad misconception in my opinion, because long-term exposure to mycotoxins can create the same degree of immune deficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just the spore part. And then the mycotoxin part, it's that, again, it's a continuum in my mind that when you're first exposed to those mycotoxins, if you have a good, robust, healthy body, and this is why everybody gets sick differently, different time zone or time frames and that kind of thing, your body will detoxify. It will rally whatever secretions are needed. It will, because mycotoxins, they don't have to get transported into cells. There are certain toxins that need to have certain proteins, just for listeners, certain proteins kind of open the door and that kind of thing. Mycotoxins just move through osmosis. So they just go to the next gradient, basically, and they can move into those tissues, into the capillaries, into the bloodstream. And so they, a breathability problem, something you can inspire, can be distributed into the body, even the brain, just through the blood system, because they're just, moving through the tissue with osmosis. So when you get that exposure and the person, a good, robust, healthy person, doesn't have the nutritional deficiencies, the genetic risk factors, which in my experience has been more due to detoxification SNPs than the HLA story. But that might be because I'm addressing things a little bit differently. I'm addressing immune system. So maybe they don't have a previous exposure. So they're coming into this very naive to this experience. They get a dose of mycotoxin exposure through their respiratory passages. The body likely will encourage a bile dump, and they might get a little loose stool. Job done, and that's it. But if that is persistently happening, now you move to the next part of that continuum that's saying, now the microbes in those areas are reporting back to the immune system. There's this really cool thing that happens between the nose and the throat. They communicate through the cervical chain and the neck. So they're saying, hey, we got a little problem. It kind of seems like we're getting, again, the intention behind the mycotoxin, we're getting a message that we're trying to get a fungal overgrowth. And maybe bacterial too, because every water damaged building has bacteria. I mean, I tell a story in my book. We tested a board that everybody agreed, all the remediators agreed, that's so moldy. And it came back completely free of mold and an incredibly high endotoxin burden. So it's all bacteria, vegetative bacteria. So yeah, you're getting lots of things, but the message in the mycotoxin, the intention being the more scary intention, suddenly that internal microbiome starts to say, I think fungus might be trying to move in here. So let's start doing defensive things. And so that wears down the immune system over time. Now your own microbiome becomes a pathogenic biofilm. It's no longer commensal. It's no longer, because I think we all have biofilm. One's called the microbiome, it could be healthy, or it could be called, we call them functional medicine biofilm, but they're all basically biofilms. It's just, is it working for you or is it working against you? So things start to act defensively. So the neighboring cells are saying, no, it's a bacteria. And, you got one guy saying it's a bacteria, three guys saying, no, it's a fungus. And now they're all arguing and they're endotoxing each other. And now you have things that can come into the environment, respirable, like Pseudomonas, which is a really tough one to get rid of, Mycobacterium, those kinds of things, because they're like, hey, if nobody's watching the shop, I'll come hang out in this nice gooey tissue and, eat some of these carbohydrates and all that kind of stuff. So you become your own sick building, even if you leave the environment. And then over time, that wears down your immune system. You get more pathogenic biofilm, more pathogenic critters, because we're eating parasites all the time. That's just part of our food source. We're eating a little bit of mycotoxin, unfortunately, way more than we should. But those are all things that we're normally exposed to, that now there's nobody guarding the gates. There's no sentinel soldiers there, and they can just host. And that over time can then become fungal overgrowth, which then can become invasive fungal infection. So it's this whole continuum. And you can be anywhere on that continuum, you can bounce, which is even trickier.
Absolutely.
You get somebody out of that mold environment and all of a sudden they get a wicked fungal infection. And it's like, oh, wow, yeah, your body's trying to detox that.
Yeah. No, it's a tough thing because, of course, you go, and I don't think people get that. They think, unless they've really had severe water damage to the home or have like an obvious mycelium growing in their closet or something like that. Which, of course, like who hasn't lived or spent time in a water damaged home or office? Or so I do think the sick building syndrome and the water damage to the home, that is a huge part of it too. But I to your point, something that I think people need to understand is, of course, with our microbiome, with sinus or the skins of the lungs, of the gut, and fungi being a normal part of that, it's in the conventional narrative, like you said, of like, unless you're HIV or like severely immunocompromised or cystic fibrosis kids, you get just the recurrent bacterial, fungal, invasive aspergillosis of the lungs and everything. um, but of course, too, when you start kind of and part of it too, I think, is that distinction of a true acute infection as categorized by conventional healthcare versus kind of understanding this idea of just microbial overgrowth and microbial imbalances. And, like with Candida, if like we all agree that Candida is just a normal commensal yeast, but same thing with conventional medicine, like they really only say, well, invasive candidiasis, like you have to be severely immunocompromised or HIV or cancer or whatever. But then, of course, it's like, well, it's like a spectrum of how much has that candida started overgrowing out of control and producing that biofilm or starting to become invasive. So it is a more complex picture than I think people really realize. And with the standard American metabolism, as I like to call it, good old Uncle Sam, you think about how many people have got the leaky gut and dysbiosis and ingesting glyphosate and all the colors and fillers and hormones and the EMF. Like it's the radiation, it's the toxic soup, it's the everything about the standard American lifestyle is so immunosuppressive and pro-inflammatory and just degenerative in nature. So then, of course, it just kind of sets the stage for just about any bug, whether it's a virus or a fungi or whatever. It kind of starts getting a little bit more virulent. So even if you haven't really had substantial water damage and substantial mold growth, these things can, through just a bit of exposure recurrently or all the other factors. It's like how much exposure, spores and fungal fragments and mycotoxins, and how resilient is your body. And like you pointed out, we have the genetic side, and then of course the epigenetic control of that. And then before you know it, though, it's that breakdown of your immune defense, the breakdown of the tissues, and then boom, enters like, okay, now we have a little bit of a problem. The mold is really moving in, starting to kind of infect. The mycotoxins are shutting you down. So let's have you take us to the brain a little bit. Let's start getting into this
Mhm.
mold brain thing, because there's a big difference between the mental health dysfunction caused by, let's say, diabetes or just standard American diet or even endotoxemia. But mold brain is something different. um,
It is.
I'd
Yeah.
love to hear you speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. It's so unlike I say that, when you and I learned this with Candida. That's before I was into mold, way early in practice. If somebody had a Candida overgrowth and I put them on antifungals and I didn't do the homework to make sure they were pooping and all this kind of stuff so they could get it out, it would go to the mind. That's the people I would get the phone call to my office. I'm feeling so anxious, I can't sleep. I'm feeling suicidal. This is when I was like, oh, this is a big deal. This goes to the brain. Fungus, for some reason, goes to the brain. It affects your mind, it affects your mood. And I really do think it's part of mold's Jedi mind trick. It's like, again, taking the 10,000-foot view, which I'm really big about this. Like, I get into the minutia so I can back out and be simple
Mhm.
and bring things into the simple. When I look at stealth infections like Lyme or Epstein-Barr or now COVID, and I look at mold, those other infections need you alive to survive.
Mhm.
They're living off of you,
Mhm.
basically,
Mhm.
and they need you. That's why you just limp. You don't, I mean, there are people who die of Lyme carditis. I want to just respect that. But the majority of people are limping around, dealing with chronic illness, undiagnosed Lyme, and are doing kind of okay, not great. With mold, it wants to compost you.
Yeah.
Its job is to compost previously living organic material. And I say that over and over again so that we stop and think about Are you vitalizing your body? Or are you sending messages through your lifestyle, through your energetic practice or spiritual practice, through your, sleep, relationships, all that kind of stuff, diet, of course? Are you sending messages of, nah, go ahead, mold, take over. I'm not using it.
Hmm.
If you're
Yeah.
not moving your body every day, you're sending a message for something that's a composter to come in and help out. So mold would just assume compost you. So I think that it goes into the brain tissue and it's sending that message of like, give up, just give up because
Yeah.
we're here. We're here to take care of it. Don't worry. You don't need to live anymore. We got it. We'll take over from here. Thinking that what the job they're being called to do is to help you kick off and they can compost you.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just when I think about that, and I've seen it in people, patient after patient after patient, and now I'm in my membership. I get to talk with lots more people at one time, and it's just like, wow, it is really a dedication, and part of getting better from this is having a daily dedication to getting better,
Yeah.
and it is not something you can skip on a daily basis, and whatever that looks like, whether it's today I'm going to make some greens. I know I won't really have the energy for it, but I'm going to make some greens. I'm going to do it. Or today I know it's really icky and cold outside, but I'm going to spend 5 minutes outside. Those are all little messages through your micro behaviors that are telling mold, nope, that's not what you've been called here to do. I'm sorry I confused you. Nope, I'm using this body. I want it to stick around. Yeah.
Absolutely. I
Isn't
think
that
that's
wild?
that was a really powerful, and it's so refreshing to hear that because we can talk in like medical jargon and technicalities, but it does kind of detract from the bigger moral truth of it. And especially, with my background in fitness and nutrition, I was kind of caught off guard when I ventured into the functional medicine space because I felt like there was such an emphasis on labs and protocols and biohacks uh, and it just felt still a little bit too reductionist. I'm like, but where's like the fitness to build resilience? Where's the yeah, it's crazy. Like I say this all the time where you have like your standard American that's overweight and all the standard American metabolism stuff, and obviously we know visceral fat is very just pro-inflammatory. But your average person that's overweight and sedentary has much higher levels of just meta inflammation, whether you're measuring IL-6 or CRP or fibrinogen, doesn't really matter. But the inflammatory pattern and kind of cytokine milieu, as I like to call it, is just more pro-inflammatory than like a highly trained athlete that is thrashing their body in the gym every day. But it's that hormetic adaptation to inflammation and oxidative stress and that resilience to it. So even with the mold individuals or the chronically ill sick, in my mind, I'm like, if you are medically stable, you are healthy enough to be moving, you are healthy enough to be
Mm-hmm.
fit, and your health, your metabolic health is going to be kind of the sum, the net effect of all the input signals. And what you were just saying with that, all of those micro input signals that you're sending to your body. So every kind of poor, or maybe poor is not a great word, that triggers some people, but more like pro-inflammatory input signal, or what is that going to do? And so, as you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
you have to fight back, right? You have to fight the bad input signals with putting in a lot of good ones.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a conscious thing. I remember in practice somebody saying, "You are so optimistic. How, it must be so nice to be optimistic." And I thought, that's not an accident.
Hmm.
That's a daily practice
Hmm.
of what do I want to be thinking about? What do I choose to be believing? What do I choose to be thinking about? And this idea of you have to fight it every day through positive changes, through making those little things. Do we all do it all the time? No, of course not. It's just
Hmm.
about writing. It's like when you're driving a car, you're going to veer left and veer right. You just keep correcting so that you're staying on the path. And it's so important. I would love to talk minutia in the brain, not just big picture, because I love, love, love your term microglial activation syndrome. I think you need to like get
Oh
some
yeah.
papers on this or
Yeah,
yes or
we're just
whatever.
getting started with
Oh yeah, because
that.
that's mold. That's
Yeah.
what it's doing. And you talked about the systemic inflammation. The connection there is that once mycotoxins get into the brain and they activate those microglia, which for the listeners is like the macrophage or the chewer upper immune cell that happens in our brain, they normally, I just saw some really cool footage of this, when they're healthy and they haven't been activated, they're out kind of like a monkey on trees, like moving through your brain tissue and moving around those neurons and synapses, the trees of our brain. And they're just mobile and moving around and surveying and finding if there's a place that they need to stop and eat junk. They clean up just metabolic junk. That's the other thing. It's not just always about infection. So I get flack from infectious disease doctors who say, we're not finding mold spores in the brain. I mean, in some cases they are. More sick people, like dementia and Alzheimer's, they are. So, this doesn't make any sense that you have microglia activation. I'm like, well, then you're not really understanding how the immune system works. The immune system is just as much part of a garbage cleanup crew as it is infection fighter crew. And if you have a bunch of mycotoxins that don't need a carrier to carry them into the blood-brain barrier, through that barrier, and our olfactory bulb is one of the few places in the brain, there's only 4 that have no blood-brain barrier. So you're sniffing a mycotoxin that can move cell to cell to cell to cell to extracellular matrix to the next cell, moving along the gradient, meaning if you're smelling it every day, you're going to shove them deeper, 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 deeper down that olfactory bulb and now into the brain. That's going to trigger that microglia cell to say, hey, there's garbage here to clean up. Once they get triggered, they lose their arms and they can't move anymore. I didn't know that. I'm just learning this. This is like super exciting stuff. Once they get triggered, they lose their arms because now they're next to the toxin they're supposed to eat, or the garbage, or the LPS, or the whatever it is. But they can be triggered. So they have their own cytokines and chemokines, but they can be triggered by a systemic inflammatory state, just what you were talking about. So if your body is in an inflamed state, it can keep that guy turned on. And now when it's turned on, it can recruit others to come over. It's like, come on over. I've got tons of garbage to clean up because we have all this inflammation. This must be the garbage that's causing all the inflammation. All the other guys get recruited. They lose their arms and they all get stuck in this, as you talk about, this activation syndrome where they don't get to mature and die. That's what they're supposed to do, is, eat, mature, die, get out of the way, and let some other mobile guy come along. They don't ever get out of that pattern. That's that cell danger response, limbic looping. We can call it lots of different things. But if you think about what that happening in the brain, where you're supposed to be having thoughts, where you're supposed to be having new learning, where you're supposed to be controlling your neurotransmitters and your mood, all that inflammation gets in the way of those processes. And it uses up the ATP and the glutathione in our brain. And you just get a slowdown of all the systems. And I think mold is really uniquely, I don't know, there's something different. And I know that there's a lot of toxin stuff too, but I think that really plays into what you've been talking about with the microglia activation.
Absolutely. That was very well said. Yeah, there's a little fly in there.
I got a little fly,
yeah, no worries. Yeah, there is just something kind of, because there are so many components, even non-celiac gluten sensitivity being a big pro-inflammatory driver. Like people, I don't know, I've been getting more and more trolls on the internet, and it is what it is, and I don't know why people are so resistant to this idea, because this whole idea of inflammation driving, whether we want to say mental health dysfunction or mental illness, I would go as far as saying it's pretty irrefutable. Like there's a enormous body of science behind it. And it's not like Big Pharma doesn't know it. Like something I'm always chatting about to make sure people don't think I'm making it up. It's like they have interleukin-6 monoclonal antibodies in phase 2 clinical trials for treatment-resistant depression. So it's like, and you look at even the SSRIs or SNRIs or benzos, a lot of those do have a sort of ameliorating effect on, reducing interleukin-6, or a lot of them, so many SSRI studies showing, serum BDNF goes up after using SSRIs or the benzos, kind of reducing the excitotoxic NMDA, cascade. But that's where, those microglial cells, like you're describing, when they're under normal, healthy physiological circumstances, they're very quiescent. I like the monkey.
Yeah, isn't it cool?
I like the monkey swinging through the trees. And
well, we all have had monkey mind, right?
Absolutely.
Like they just get stuck and they just like your brain. So it's like, well, the monkeys in my mind, they really are there.
Yeah. That's I mean, I am about as monkey minded as it gets, but Yeah, it's the microglial dysfunction is such a because it's like they really regulate the neuroinflammatory cascade, the excitotoxic, they secrete cornylinic, which breaks down the blood-brain barrier and activates the NMDA. They release BDNF, and so there's microglia, and so the two major phenotypes, and then there's the sub, which is a little crazy, but the M1 phenotype being your kind of cytotoxic, like, yeah, lose their arms, and it's just like, all right, missiles launching, pro
Yeah.
inflammatory meteor versus
Yeah.
more, the M2 phenotype of, more anti inflammatory, more neuroprotective. And so, like, even with neurodegeneration, what they're really seeing is, this kind of neuroinflammatory cascade. It's very self-perpetuating. So, like you're saying,
Mhm.
it kind of gets stuck in this sort of perpetual M1 phenotype, even because they do all those studies all the time of, like, stick the mice with LPS to just create that cytokine storm, activate the microglia, and even induce the neurodegeneration. But even once the LPS has been removed and gone, because of this kind of self feedback loop where, neurons are releasing like ATP, and that's activating purinergic receptors and stuff, where, yeah, these your macrophages of the brain, your sentinels of the brain, they're just getting stuck in this constant kind of pro-inflammatory. So when you look at the mold and the glyphosate and the gluten and the insulin resistance and just all these factors, and it's like it's just this constant pro-inflammatory flux and storm going on in the brain. And so even in PTSD, they're looking at, microglial inhibition really kind of becomes like the sort of focal point. And but mold is it's so, I love the way that you put that, of like it's trying to decompose you, and causes apoptosis of neurons and stuff, because, yeah, it's like, hey, but it does that, and the cognitive dissonance, which then makes it kind of a lot harder for clients or patients or individuals to, comply with their program, right? Because they're fighting against their own mind that is going into this very dark and kind of traumatized, scary place.
Mhm. Mhm. It is dark, and there's a lot of anxiety.
Hmm.
That's I see that as a chief symptom, that anxiousness. I
Hmm.
try to say anxiousness, not anxiety, because anxiety conjures up, anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and that can definitely happen. But you can have this low-lying internal sense of I'm not safe, things aren't right, I don't know what's going on, I just don't feel right, something's off.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense because it's a respirable threat and it's invisible. So there's no tiger out there that somebody's saying, that's why I feel like this. And so they start to kind of pin it on things in their life that really aren't creating the anxiety. And you can see marriages have difficulty. You can see relationships really break down. People stress about money when they really don't need to be stressing about it. Or they stress about anticipatory events. And there's a lot of like list writing and ruminating and all of this kind of thing that happens, and you get in that loop, not only just the limbic looping we were talking about, but that there's no the thinking brain and the reptilian brain, there's that dissonance. Like the
Hmm.
reptilian brain's like, we got a problem here, folks. And the cognitive brain is using their eyes because we're very visual and looking around and going, no, I don't see it. I don't see anything. You must be mistaken, reptilian brain. And then you get this breakdown of the two parts of the brain, this very ancient,
Hmm.
very wise. And the person's like, I got to get out of this place. And they're thinking, I got to get out of this marriage. Or, and kids will behave more reptilian y.
Yeah.
They're going to act out.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, this isn't good. I don't feel safe. I'm going to act out. Some of them go to sleep. Those are like the great kids in a moldy classroom. I mean, like 25% are acting out severely, and the rest are comatose because
Yeah.
they're just like, getting brain fog in class. It's really interesting. But yeah, the acting out is actually, it's not. I wish we would start looking at that. And again, I'm really into pandas and pans. So we would
Yeah.
start looking at that as body expression, neuropsych expression of a body problem,
Hmm.
because and I've heard you talk about that, the things that are going on in the brain, the connection of depression is there is something physically going on with the brain. You can have trauma that can cause it, definitely. But if you have somebody that doesn't, like, they're telling you their adverse childhood event was that their parent gave them a purple sucker and not the red one, you're like, we got some brain inflammation we better be looking at here, because that doesn't resonate as a super traumatic event, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you said all that, because I find myself kind of fighting the internet in a lot of ways trying to get that across. Because, of course, people, they read one post and cherry pick and take it out of context and project their triggered emotions. It's just not even
Mhm.
a logical or reasonable assessment in any way. But something I'm seeing more and more of that I'm a little concerned about is, trauma is kind of becoming trendy. And I feel like trauma is
Yeah.
kind of getting all the hype and the press in a way of like everything's trauma, everybody's traumatized. But I like how you put that of, and I say similar things that maybe are more facetious, but kind of like, okay, the red sucker instead of the purple one, like, oh, I'm traumatized. And well, if you believe yourself and you choose to believe, and kind of victim mentality. But the ultimate point with the, trauma being a spectrum, but of course, the literature is very clear on this, whether it's major depressive disorder, neurodegenerative disease, or even PTSD, like heightened inflammation, it just exacerbates any of it. So whether it's, you're genetically inclined to have more of a bipolar type of spectrum disorder or ADHD, or you're prone to more anxiety, how it manifests is pretty individualized, but it's just inflammation kind of, and excitotoxicity, but it's easier to say inflammation kind of being the thing that just lights it all up, and it just heightens
Mhm.
that and makes everybody. And with the chronic Lyme, I don't know if this is common knowledge at all with like the ILADS group, but I was reading some papers. I was talking about how, elevated pro-inflammatory cytokines and hypothalamus really seem to increase just bodily pain, like nociception, and then how, dead Borrelia. So it's like you do the doxy or whatever to kill the active Borrelia, but then the dead Borrelia like piss off the microglia more than the live Borrelia, and so
Right,
that kind of,
right. And we
creates
see that in mold
pain.
too.
Right.
Yeah. We see that in mold a lot, that somebody they, let's remodel our bathroom, the one that had leaked 20 years ago and nobody knew about it because it's a new house to them or something like that. And you break up all these dried spores, which now can create, for every one spore, 300 to 500 fragments that are have DNA on them.
Mm,
And that DNA can trigger, 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 trigger. And so basically, if you're breathing any of the dust in that place, you're getting the DNA trigger happening on the microbiome. That's why I'm always talking about sinus treatment and gut treatment, like, because you're trying to make sure that you are guarding the gates there and to continue to tell that tissue that's being triggered by all of this DNA exposure that's saying, oh, it's back again. Here we go. We're going to be sick again. Like, okay, no, that's how we get our resiliency. And that's when I use mushrooms.
mm.
We're past the acute stuff. Then, when you have the mycelial network of the planet, and Paul Stamets is one of my
Yes. Yeah.
absolute heroes, and he describes it as the internet of the planet.
Yeah.
I'm all about nature and connecting and that kind of thing. And so by taking this avoidance of fungus in the beginning and then using it therapeutically to get
Yeah.
your resiliency back, it gets you grounded again. So you can get exposed to those DNA fragments, and your body doesn't have to say, okay, here we go, we're doing it again. Now you have wisdom, you're plugged in a
Yeah.
little bit better, and the tissue can say, let's consult our internet and see, is this a problem? Do we have to turn into a pathogenic biofilm again? Or do we just need to call more macrophages and chew it all up? And I think that that's the continuity between mold and Lyme, is you get the innate system, which is our Rambo's, mano a mano kind of fighters, and they also do the cleanup. They get depleted.
Mhm.
And so you don't have enough cleanup crew. And that's why detoxification is so important, and immune modulation. I feel like that's what I've brought into this conversation, Dr. Jess as well, and Lauren Tessier. So we've got people that are talking this talk and saying, like you are, we've got to clean up the body. This health hokey pokey, I call it, it is not inconsequential. It is the foundation that all the rest of it works on top of.
It was so good. I almost mentioned Paul's documentary, Fantastic Fungi, earlier, because
Yeah.
it's such a beautiful film. And anybody that hasn't seen it, definitely go watch it. And
Yes.
when I watched it, of course, they talked about the beautiful side of fungus, and it was just like in the very beginning that, like, they mentioned that like fungi can heal you or it can kill you, and they didn't go into that
Yeah.
part, which is obviously where we kind of make our living.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fungal hyphal network, and I when I get interviewed a lot, I always say I dream of a world where the human species, like a return to symbiosis, is kind of what I keep saying. And
Mm.
I picture almost like the movie Avatar, where we'll still have modern technology, but we're going to learn how to use the hyphal networks as our internet instead of, the
Mhm.
5G that's causing a bunch of proxy nitrite and stuff. Um,
Yes.
it's so
And people
crazy though.
are already, I mean, there are people who have fully engaged their right brain, which this is a whole other podcast we could have. It would be
Totally. I think
super
we'll
fun to
have to in
have.
season
Yeah.
4.
Yeah. And that's like for people that are clairvoyant,
Yeah.
clairsentient, clairaudient, I mean, that's an ability we all have access to, but
Yeah.
there's so much interference now with bringing electricity into a home, with
Hmm.
now, with 5G and that kind of thing. But we are powerful, energetic beings.
Hmm.
We don't have to be victimized by that.
Yeah.
There are things you need to do to hold your own energy and to connect with nature and to be still plugged into that mycelial network and the ethers, that kind of thing. But that's another place where I'm seeing a lot of fear that makes me really worried that if we approach 5G and Wi-Fi with fear, I think then you're involuting, you're bringing it into, you're being able to be invaded by it. And so I think that the next gen of healing, what I want to really get into is not just what plant do you need to take, because that I think will be an intuitive
Hmm.
thing that the plants will start to speak to you, because that's
Hmm.
definitely what happened with me. That's why I became a naturopathic doctor. The next gen of healing is just your is the spiritual healing, and then you seek the things that you need, and that's a very dynamic thing.
Yeah.
Even going through mold treatment, what you need in the beginning is not the same thing you need in the middle of it, and not at all what you need for resiliency, because
Yeah.
that's when you need the mushrooms, which is,
Totally.
I didn't put any of that in my book because I didn't want to confuse people
Sure.
with mold brain. They're like, wait, I thought you said mushrooms were bad, and now you're
Yeah.
telling me I should take, that it's too confusing.
Oh,
But I feel like
absolutely.
now there's more awareness that, even to think about, should I be on medicinal mushrooms, and because of course if you have immune issues, most functional practitioners are going to put you on a mushroom.
Yeah.
Well, and I found in my practice that made my patients worse. So I
Mm.
was just like, okay, that's my group of, chronic Lyme, environmentally sick, that's my bias, is the people that came to me and they really got disordered with medicinal mushrooms until we whacked back the fungal burden in their body and got their biofilm dissolved and acting more like a commensal microbiome.
Mm. I'm glad to hear that insight, because there's so much chatter in the industry about that, of like, do I do the SAC-B? Do I not? Do I throw in
Mhm.
some, Stammet 7 or reishi or something? Do I not? And it's hard. And of course, there's all this kind of, I think it's more theory than anything, of like, how do we balance TH1, TH2, TH17? And it's like, well, what about TH9 and TH25, or these other
Right,
THs that we're not even
right,
talking
right,
about?
right.
Know that it works that way.
Yeah.
But
I have a whole theory about TH17 after reading some of the things that it induces. It's like like MMP9, and
yeah.
it basically, I think it's in the absence of immune sufficiency
Hmm.
and then correlative antimicrobial assistance, the body's just trying to keep the biofilm down with TH17. And then you can get into that autoimmune thing. I think a lot of autoimmune disease is stealth infections that got places they shouldn't.
Hmm.
TH17, if you look at what it does, it chews up our ECM.
Hmm.
Why would we need that? Like, it's not the body doing you wrong, it's the body communicating something to you. So
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's so that innate intelligence. That's the thing. Is I think the body. I don't think it really makes any mistakes, and I think we
Nope.
kind of jump to this assumption of like, oh well, this is dysfunctional, and let's push down that MMP9, or let's try to treat that MSH or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And it's like, how can we support the body with what it already knows how to do? And I think that is a very holistic mindset. And you have that very holistic thinking, and I don't think necessarily everybody in this industry does. I think there is still some reductionistic, and
Mm-hmm.
Jill Carnahan and I were hanging out. And we were talking about that a little bit, and not everybody, but she also too. We had a big conversation, so I loved hearing what you were saying. More the, the esoteric, the quantum side of healing too, because I think, like speaking for myself, when I was going through my, kind of Great Depression and everything, at the time as a young man, I didn't feel like I necessarily had a bunch of psychological shit that I needed to really work through so much as it was like my body just didn't feel the way. So my thing was like, some physiological kind of hacks, if you will, and protocols and sporting. And I like ditched the gluten and healed my gut and get out of a moldy home and a toxic relationship and all that. Um, I think the physiological side is a little bit easier, but I think the true healing, yeah, that's where the quantum, but it all has to be put together, which is what I really love about what we're doing in this conversation is. And so like in my some of my slide decks, I created this like integrative intervention spectrum of like there's the psychology, the spiritual, the quantum, there's the environmental, both, your literal environment, but your psycho-emotional environment just as
Mm.
much, and then the lifestyle, the diet, the exercise, sleep, so on and so forth, supplemental, and then allopathic pharmaceutical. But I think a lot of times people kind of get stuck in one of those buckets. And it's like the magic's when you put it all together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I am not against pharmaceutical antifungals. I
Totally.
mean, we need them, and I
Yeah.
prescribe them like a naturopath.
Cool.
I'm going to adjust dosing, timing,
Yeah.
all of those things, and make sure we have things on board to manage the side effects and the effects of it.
Hmm.
So I really love to see that we're moving. I feel like my kids' generation, they're a we generation.
Hmm.
They've come from Pokemon and all this thing where we need everybody's skills so we can all succeed. That idea, I just think it's so beautiful that they're trickling onto, the older. I mean, I'm way older, so older generations to say, hey, maybe things don't have to be competitive. Maybe things don't have to be, you know, I don't know, that you name it, greedy. There's a lot
Yeah.
of that going on too, that we need all kinds of different types and ways to approach this. And that's one thing I love talking with like Jill Carnahan and just so many different people. Dr. Neil Nathan and I just did a workshop together, and we don't practice the same.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
whole point was to communicate we don't practice the same
Yeah.
and we're both getting results. So it's too new of a field to have any confidence that there's one way to do this. And
Totally.
there's never one way to do anything anyway. It's all about the patient sitting in front of you and what do
Right.
they need.
Yeah.
And having a bigger toolbox, each patient is you're plucking different things out of that toolbox depending on what that person needs. That's
Exactly.
real medicine. And paying attention to the energetics, I think, is the part that hasn't happened yet,
Yeah.
and that I think is becoming, I'm seeing it become like something safe to talk about, where a lot of people felt that way, and tap in their own way, but weren't willing to sort of put themselves out there. And I'm really feeling the call that my angels are like, you got to start talking about all this stuff that you do and
Yeah.
have done for 20 years. To That's the what's behind the healing, because
Hmm.
the herbs do matter, what your nutrients do matter, your diet does matter, how you move your body matters, all those things matter. But you could be doing all of that and still not be getting results, and that's where frustration can set in. And
Hmm.
instead of getting frustrated, say, okay, what am I not looking at, or what am I missing, or those kind of things. And that's going to be a different kind of doctor.
Absolutely. It's that innate intuition that I think we all have deep within us.
Mhm.
I think humans are immensely intuitive, creatures, if you will, but we are so detached from that, and we get so unplugged from that, and it is very much the matrix world that we're living in, and I think we all feel that, and of course, I think a lot of our suffering is relatively self-induced in the sense that we are going against our intuition, and that's why we feel that deep sort of conflict of the tectonic plates of our soul that are just
Mm.
colliding. And so I do think as we kind of move into that fifth dimension, that quantum healing, and that's where everything's going. And of course that's where like the psilocybin and the plant medicine, it is a powerful experience that can really drop that veil of ego and allow us to see the beautiful truth and love that has always been in us and around us. We just, we lose sight of it, right?
Mhm. Mhm. There's a lot
Wild
of
thing.
people making money off that.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, there
That's a
sure
really
is.
handy thing. Yeah.
Yeah, gosh. Well, we'll have to do a part two conversation to get into more of that in season 5. But I don't want to take up your entire day. But this I think you brought a lot of, because by this point in time, I've had Sandeep on the podcast, I've had Lauren, I've had Jess. So we've had numerous mold episodes, but I like how each person has brought kind of a different perspective. And I think all of them together make a very well rounded. And like you said, though, it's meeting the client or patient where they are at and
Mhm.
being kind of intuitive enough to be in tune with their energy and empowering them to be able to make their decisions based on what's going to resonate with them, because there's a lot of kind of ways to skin the cat, but what's going to be the thing that they're ready, willing, and able to apply themselves to.
Yeah, and when you have mold brain, you talk about mold is so weird with the brain.
Yeah,
That's where it's really nice to have someone to work with, because it's really hard to have that discernment to know even what the next single step should be. That's the art of practice for us, is that we
yeah,
can see, okay, just one tiny little thing, add a green juice and come, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Like
yeah,
that's the one little thing you need to do. Or you need to get outside for 10 minutes as early in the day as possible and get exposed to the sunshine. Let's start there. And for some people, they come in and you can just like, bah, 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 here are all the things, and they're ready. So that discernment, it's nice to have somebody to work with that can help you with that. What's my next single step? Or 10,
absolutely.
if you're ready for 10.
Hey, some people can take that on, but
Yeah, heck yeah.
when they're a little scattered. So as we start wrapping up, I'd love to hear what's new in the world of Dr. Jill Krista. What are you up to these days? Because I see you all over the place. You've got your book, Break the Mold, which everybody listening should go read, because otherwise you're not going to understand anything. But what's new in your world? What's on your agenda as you move into the 5th dimension here?
Oh, fun. I am taking July and August off of social media and
Cool.
extra stuff, interviews, whatever, to write a book and create a course on pandas. So that's
I heard a rumor
pandas and
about this.
pans.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Okay.
was going to happen last year, but that's just the way things go. I have very, very big ideas.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then who knows, I might continue on with I was writing a book on post-concussion syndrome, using
Mm,
natural medicine for post-concussion,
cool.
when mold hit, and all I could think about was mold. So I was like,
Mm,
I guess I'm writing a mold book. I don't know, that kind of thing. So we'll see. But pandas and pans, there's a lot of really struggling kids. And there's a mold connection, there's a Lyme connection, there's a microglia connection, all those. I just love neuroinflammatory
yeah.
conditions because there's so much we can do to help.
Yeah.
And people really, really struggle. They're traumatized.
Hmm.
They live in terror. It's an internal terror, and it's just a heartbreak to see. And I have 20 years, 21 years now in the trenches as a mom of twins with PANS. So, and congenital Lyme. So I feel like, okay, I'm ready. I'm uniquely qualified to be talking about this.
Yeah. No, I love that. I have just so much love and respect for you. And, I joke all the time because I don't have anything to hide. So I joke on the internet all the time of like, I'm either the most unqualified human to be talking about all this mental health stuff, or I'm the most qualified, kind of depending on the perspective. But like you're saying, I mean, it's like, yeah, you can go through whatever educational programs and get the piece of paper, get the letters. You can do all that, but there's nothing like real world experience, being a mom of 2 children and going through it, or helping countless patients and going through your own mold journey. So I that's kind of was the pull, and I was hoping to maybe get a little teaser, but I'm so happy and proud of you to hear that you're, take a step back so you can focus on manifesting your best work. And
Thank you.
I will be very excited to see your next book, and we'll definitely get you back on the show to have a part 2 conversation.
Yeah, that's a microglia rich conversation for
I feel
sure.
it.
There's a lot
Yeah,
going on there with
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Super
hopefully I can
cool.
get my book going too. We can really powwow it out and just, but that I should follow your lead. I need to like take a step back
I
too so
just
I can
got
write.
that, yeah, I got that download of like,
Yeah.
girl, I'm in charge,
Yeah.
So what am I griping about? Because I'm the one in charge of that. So
Sure.
yeah, just yeah, take time off.
Cool. Cool.
Mm,
Pans and pandas it is. Well, Jill, this has been such a pleasure, such a long time coming. And I'm sure it's just the first of many conversations to come. So thank you so much for joining me. And I really, I know that, traveling only when it makes sense to, but hopefully we cross paths in person and give you a big hug.
yeah, that big hug's waiting.
Cool. Cool.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you.
Well, I'll let you enjoy the rest of your day. So we'll, include all the links, your book, you beautiful to, shout from the rooftops how amazing you are. And this will be slotted for June. So we'll be in touch with all that stuff as we get a little bit closer. But thanks for your time
Right
and I hope
on.
you
Thank
enjoy the rest of your day, my
you.
friend.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Bye, Jill.
Bye.